Hi, everyone.
Hi again. We're in the Proclaimer's book on page 54. In the last segment, the Proclaimer's book has been talking about the growth in the first 20 years. So by 1899, they had 2,501 participants in the Memorial of Christ's Death, as they call it here, in 339 different groups, separate meetings, which when you think about the math of it is about 7 per group.
And everyone was partaking in those days.
Yeah. So they were united around the conviction that that's what Christians should do, get together and take the Lord's Supper. But they're exhibiting now this desire to get united in a more visible way.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, as the next subhead covering the next page, page 55, Unifying the Growing Flock. C.T. Russell encouraged all readers of the Watchtower to come together wherever they could to form groups, small or large, in order to build one another up spiritually. Scriptural counsel was provided through the columns of the Watchtower. Traveling representatives of the Watchtower Society were also sent out from headquarters to keep in touch with the various groups and to build them up spiritually.
At intervals, there were also special assemblies attended by Bible students from many places. This is a special invitation to every reader who can come, urged the March 1886 issue of the Watchtower. What was the occasion? The annual commemoration of the Lord's evening meal, to be held on Sunday, April 18, 1886 at Allegheny. More, though, was planned. A series of special meetings was scheduled during the evenings of the week that followed. The Bible students in Allegheny opened their homes and their hearts free of charge for the visiting delegates. For the next few years, similar assemblies were held in Allegheny at the time of the memorial of the Lord's death. During the late 1890s, conventions began to be organized in many places. C.T. Russell frequently spoke on these occasions. What was it like to listen to him?
Ralph Leffler, who heard C.T. Russell speak, recalled, quote, "When on the platform before an audience, he always wore a long black cloak and a white necktie. His voice was not loud, and he would never use a microphone or a loudspeaker, for they had not been invented yet. Somehow his voice always carried to the most distant part of the auditorium. He could hold the attention of a large audience for not just 1 hour, but sometimes 2 or 3 hours. He would always begin his lecture with a gentle bow to the audience, and while speaking he did not stand still like a statue, but was always on the move, gesticulating with his arms and stepping from side to side or from front to back. I never once saw him carry any notes or a manuscript in his hands, only the Bible, which he used very frequently. He spoke from the heart and in a manner that was very convincing. Usually the only article on the platform in those days was a small table with a Bible on it and a pitcher of water and a glass from which the speaker occasionally took a sip of water."
Those early conventions were periods of warm fellowship and spiritual refreshment. They served to strengthen the unity of all the Bible students and to publicize Bible truths. Meanwhile, as the decade of the 1890s drew to a close, it was evident to the Bible students that much more needed to be done in disseminating Bible truth, but they were still relatively few in number. Was there a way of reaching millions more people than could be contacted by the methods then being used? Indeed, there was.
So why do they need to unify the growing flock when obviously the people, according to the testimony so far in the book, were coming from Christendom? They're coming from churches, and what they have in common seems to be a disgruntlement with the way that church was being done in their whatever congregation. Russell himself, obviously. But the others, too, that we've read about by name so far, who were coming to him because they were getting something distinctive from him.
And the distinction was that they had this system of chronology that they were following, Russell's chronology. And I think that was what drew them, is people like to live in the current in the present, and so they think if it's going to happen in their time, that would be an appeal to a lot of people. So to me, who's doing the tickling here? I think putting that as the emphasis, it's going to happen in your lifetime, drew a lot of people.
You would think it would draw an awful lot more people, though. We've only got 2,500 or so participants 20 years after the founding of the Watchtower.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, if you know anything about that era, there are all kinds of people who were doing millennial and prophetic speculation. Russell was just one among many. And they're not growing very fast, despite the fact that he's apparently charismatic, based on the reports we have, even from Christendom, talking about Russell, say he had a certain effective speaking and communicating style, and that's confirmed here by Mr. Leffler.
And I think that the first paragraph tells you, too, that it says, scriptural counsel was provided through the columns of the Watchtower. They're more and more concentrating on just his thoughts and his teaching, because he writes all the publications.
Well, he wrote the books. It's not true that he wrote all the articles in the Watchtower in those days, but
Right.
It is focused on his
On
peculiar,
him, and he's
his
called,
peculiar teaching.
Last time we were talking about him being called the pastor of the people. So they're really following him. They're following his ideas.
So this idea that we left behind the traditions of men, yeah, but now you're following
a tradition of one man.
One man. So the carrot is the chronology, and they've left
Yeah.
that completely out of this section anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the appeal is obviously multiple. And one of the things that's distinctive here that they don't talk about as being distinctive in the second paragraph is the idea of the annual commemoration of the Lord's evening meal. This is not a tradition they got from Christendom.
Yeah.
This is their own tradition, which they still honor to this day.
Yeah, that kind of surprised me, because they wouldn't have got that from the churches that they came from, because the Lord's Supper is practiced or participated in regularly at a lot of churches.
Weekly.
Some of them even weekly, yeah. So where does this idea of it being a once-a-year thing come from? I don't really know. And
you have to contrast the growth. Again, 2,500 after 20 years of the Watchtower, going to the Lord's Supper, and the memorial, as they call it here.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking of the contrast with today, or even in those days. But let's just say today, with the way the gospel is growing in lands where the churches aren't planted, haven't been planted for a long time anyway. For instance, in China and Korea. Mm. And in parts of Africa, many parts of Africa, where they have great opposition, not just from the Communist Party, let's say, in China. 80 million Christians in China in the last, and that has mostly exploded in the last couple of generations. Yeah. Same with Korea.
And they're not coming from, like in this case, people who are disgruntled with the church. These people are coming pretty fresh.
Yeah.
They've come from backgrounds, not Christian backgrounds.
And many of the brothers in Africa now, in evangelical churches and others, Anglican, for instance, is the biggest Anglican communion in the world now is in Africa. Mm. There's maximum inconvenience in parts of Africa because of militant Islam.
Yeah. So how is it that the church gets people and keeps people when they don't have this it's going to happen in your day tickling of ears, I would say? This insistence that it's always right around the corner. They've got people who follow Christ. The appeal is Jesus.
Yeah.
And the gratefulness for their sins being forgiven by him. This is the appeal.
The greatness of the Savior.
So it doesn't matter when the final things happen. It doesn't matter, because you're following the person of Christ.
Yeah, so in a way, in this one page, you've got the characteristics of cults all kind of laid out for you. One is the separation, the clean separation from all other people, the insistence that there's really only one legit channel, and here obviously it's become Charles Taze Russell, and that's linked to the other characteristic of cultic groups, at least at the beginning. They have a charismatic leader. Sometimes it becomes institutionalized, as it has in the Watchtower. No longer a leader, but now an institution that is assumed to have the same charisma, that is anointing, as the original leader did.
Although some have been criticizing the governing body as kind of having almost a status of stars. They're
well, that can happen, but we know in our generation that wasn't the case. They were virtually invisible. But by then, the entrenchment of the idea that we're the only ones who are carrying on pure worship, and yet at this very time, Russell is teaching a lot of things that now have been abandoned by the Watchtower itself. Yeah. So how can you keep up this front that you are the ones who are purely worshiping God, as it says in the first paragraph here? They're being built up spiritually. It says it twice in a short paragraph, and then later it says that these people took on as their assignment, not just Russell's assignment, but their personal assignment, to publicize Bible truths and disseminate Bible truths. But you weren't disseminating pure truth.
I mean, the very first paragraph you read, it said, scriptural counsel provided through the columns of the Watchtower. Why aren't they just using the Bible?
You know the answer.
They criticize everyone else and say they're following people's teachings, reading their books, but you're doing the same thing. It's just you're isolating yourself with one book or one group and their information. Well, that goes back to Russell's day.
And again, that's the characteristic. So the separation from other bodies and the one channel of information, that's a typical characteristic of a cultic group. The charismatic leader, also number 4, would be the Bible truth is committed only to you. You are the only ones that are preaching Bible truth. So that phrase restoring truth. Oh. They had that phrase present truth in those days. We don't do that one anymore. But it's the same idea. Whatever truth we have right now is the truth, even if we change it in the future. And then the 5th one is mobilize the army if you can. Don't just do it yourself. So Russell was very businesslike in that respect. And he got his best people and sent them out selling his books, 50 cents a piece, and supported himself with the business empire he already had, then by this publishing empire that he built, and of course got even more impressive in the days of Nathan Knorr, didn't it? So we wanted to put in some links. I know. Yeah. I think the first was to Slaves of Men.
Slaves of Men, the first of 3. So, and the second one was 7 characteristics of the early church.
Based on Acts 2.
Yeah, so that was something that I thought, this annual Lord's Supper thing, you might want to read 1 Corinthians 11 and Acts 2. And just see the impression you get.
Yeah.
Is this a yearly event or more regular? Just reading those, what conclusion would you come to?
So the first video again is Slaves of Men, 5 characteristics of cultic groups, and the second one is 7 characteristics of the early church then. Okay. Good. Yeah. See you soon.
Bye.